pause on that because I think it is pressing. You mentioned LBJ. That's one of the things that I've been thinking in the back of my mind all along. One of the things that people say all the time is that, Joe Biden won't be pushed to the left. And to be fair, he won't be pushed to the left by anything by what most people imagine, right? But I actually thought that Noam Chomsky made a really good point, and I think we might get into this a little bit later. He was recently, there was a really good interview on the Grayzone with Aaron Mate, who they talked specifically about nuclear proliferation and the rising conflict with Iran under Donald Trump. But one of the things that Noam Chomsky just kind of said in passing was we need to push Joe Biden like we pushed Ronald Reagan. And I think that that's a much better way to understand this framing. And he referenced specifically this huge global push to make Ronald Reagan sign a nuclear deal with Gorbachev in Russia. And of course, the nuclear treaty between the United States is set to expire about a month after about a month after inauguration. So but they've Russia and the Kremlin have essentially already decided that they're done with any talks with Donald Trump. So if he's reelected, we will essentially return to a nuclear arms race with Russia. It's getting absolutely no media attention. But aside from the fact that that's a much more important and justifiable reason to vote for Joe Biden as opposed to Donald Trump that gets no attention at all, and one that I've considered heavily in my personal justification for it. But I think that the idea of pushing Joe Biden like you push somebody like Ronald Reagan, where you make it complete political suicide in order to not do follow through with the actions of the people, right? There's so many people in the street. There's so many people making these demands that you have to fold because it's so obvious. That's what we would have to do if you're going to push Joe Biden to the left either way.
Yeah, totally. And I think that is a pretty good segue into this Chomsky interview if you wanted to start going over that at all.
Yeah, definitely. Let's press play and listen to the old Chomsmeister.
Yeah, was there a specific point in the interview that you wanted to watch, or do you just want to start from the beginning?
Let's go ahead and do a quick intro and talk about it from there.
Okay.
Looks like a unique threat to. Welcome to Pushback. I'm Aaron Mate. Joining me is Noam Chomsky. Noam, thank you for joining me today.
Glad to be with you.
You have been warning that Trump and the people around him pose a unique threat to humanity. On this front, you've gotten a lot of attention for your warnings about Trump's policies on climate change. I want to focus today on other aspects of your warnings that have not gotten as much attention, starting with nuclear weapons, an issue that you've been involved with your whole life. Trump has greatly exacerbated the threat, pulling out of the INF treaty with Russia, pulling out of the Open Skies Treaty, and now looking like he will sabotage the New START treaty, the last remaining accord that limits the nuclear weapons stockpiles of the U.S. and Russia. As we are speaking, Russia has said that there's no chance of an agreement between the U.S. and Russia before the election, which leaves a very short window to renew New START before it expires in February. Your thoughts on the Trump administration's nuclear policy and what it would mean if it manages to kill the New START treaty?
Well, the New START treaty will be the last of the remaining treaties on arms control. Trump has, actually George W. Bush eliminated the first one, the ABM treaty. But Trump, ever since he's come into office, has systematically destroyed one after the other. The INF treaty, which goes back to Reagan, Gorbachev, the Open Skies Treaty actually was initiated by Eisenhower. He's threatened to carry out new nuclear tests. That hasn't been done for almost 30 years. The New START is the last one. It's, as you said, it's due to be renewed in February. The Trump administration has been delaying and delaying and delaying. The Russians have been pleading for negotiations to renew it. Washington's been producing very frivolous objections. Finally, at the last minute, Billingsley, their negotiator, claims, okay, I finally reached an agreement.
We believe that there is an agreement in principle at the highest levels of our two governments. It's why I cut short my trip to Asia and made a beeline for Helsinki when the Russians called and wanted to sit down. And I'm hopeful that that sort of gentleman's agreement, that arrangement that we feel has been reached, as I've said, at the highest levels, will ultimately need to percolate down through their system so that my counterpart hopefully will be authorized to negotiate.
Nobody knows what it is. It seems
here we can press pause here. Basically, what that guy, in case anybody who hasn't been following the New START, basically the back and forth that's going on between the Pompeo State Department and the Kremlin renegotiating the New START treaty. Essentially, what Russia brought to the table was a simple extension of the deal, basically keeping the exact same terms, but extending it down the line. The Trump administration, the Pompeo State Department, they've rejected that. They've continuously kind of sent their like bullyish, like, oh no, like I got to put my dick on the table and make some, concessions from Russia. Russia's not playing that game. So essentially they're at a standstill. That clip that they just played, there's been no evidence that there's been a gentleman's agreement. It's essentially just a fucking, it's just talk, right? It's the Trump staff trying to, make it seem like something's happening in the weeks leading up to the election for like Uber policy wonks, but really nothing's going on. Basically, that I just wanted to get your take on that as somebody who, obviously isn't a guy that's interested in Biden, doesn't want to sign off on it, but is that a more compelling case to you than you've seen made talking about nuclear proliferation, talking about the Iran conflict that another 4 years of Trump could, create a real problem for? Is that more of a like salient argument to you than, the ones that are, constantly peddled on, MSNBC?
Yeah, oh yeah, 100%, 100%. And if Biden basically made this kind of thing, these kind of policy differences, the cornerstone of his campaign, really making the contrast between Trump when it comes to issues like this. And obviously we've talked about climate change too, where he doesn't go nearly far enough, but at least offers a substantive difference with the Paris Climate Accord and some serious plans. This issue of nuclear proliferation and the closer we get to the doomsday, essentially later in this interview, Noam Chomsky goes on to talk about how the doomsday clock or whatever has now been moved. Even it's now into
midnight. Yeah.
They stopped even using minutes now. It's literally seconds away from total nuclear annihilation at the hands of these weapons. So yeah, this is the kind of issue that keeps anyone up at night that knows anything about it, that's educated to the extent that these weapons exist, to the extent of the conflicts that exist between countries that have these weapons. This is obviously a ticking time bomb in the most literal sense. And yeah, I think Biden would it would help himself to make these distinctions more, because it just proves a broader point that he's the more serious candidate when it comes to understanding reality, when it comes to understanding the gravity of extremely serious situations and the consequences that arise from them. And yeah, you ask what someone like me thinks about this. Well, again, basically when it comes to an issue like this, you ask any lefty, and this is basically like, in a way calling my bluff or calling their bluff. It's like, well, obviously Joe Biden's better on this issue, So even as someone like me who's not voting for Joe Biden, because as we talked about, I don't really necessarily want to sign my name next to given his past of incarceration and the war on drugs and all of these things that I'm are so opposite to what my values are. However, when it does come to issues like this, Noam Chomsky is 100% right, and I don't think that any reasonable person, any intellectual person could argue otherwise when it comes.
Yeah, he says in this interview, kind of snarkily as he's known to, is he's like, we can debate a lot of things, but we can't debate simple arithmetic. +1 is 2. Yeah, and I think that's it. I don't know, and that was kind of what I would have hoped to have seen from a foreign policy debate from Joe Biden. I think that, obviously he has nowhere to stand when it comes to the war that's going on, the wars that are going on. And I do not trust that. Joe Biden is a war hawk. Let's be clear. I think it is going to be entirely beholden on the American left to violently reject any kind of hawkish opposition that the Biden campaign, or I guess it would be the Biden administration, gets into. Because if they try and pull anything like what Barack Obama did, and there is not, thousands upon thousands of bodies in the streets of every major city, then they're going to think that they can get away with it, and that's going to be, more blood and destruction, on the hands of every American taxpayer, frankly.
Yep, which is why we see a large move towards, a more automated military presence in the streets of these countries, be it via drones, which, Donald Trump increased by over 400%.
In its first year alone.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's clearly already a move towards, you know, this is kind of fake out position, which a lot of people have, including I think a lot of the Trump supporter, or at least the Trump people have, which is kind of like, well, we should stay in these we should have a presence there to, you know, maintain control over the natural resources, but they're not necessarily comfortable with American citizens dying to do that. So they're like, let's just basically send in like fucking, you know, chappies or fucking RoboCops and a bunch of drones so that we can still maintain control over the region without having to, you know, sacrifice
Next gen Blackwater, you know, just.
Yeah, exactly. That way there's not as much resistance because simply the results are less visible. You know, if people are coming home with, you know, PTSD and they're not coming home with their limbs blown off and, you know, with all of these horrible side effects.
Or just not fucking coming home.
Or just not coming home. Yeah. If there's not that, you know, visible, you know, proof of our imperialism, it's just all outsourced to robots and AI, then most people here are, you know, unfortunately, because of our media, does such a disservice. You know, we see even recently the New York Times got rid of its original war reporting section. They're no longer going to be funding original reporting on matters of U.S. war. So, like, people aren't being informed about this. People have so much stress, so much economic instability in their own lives that it's hard to, you know, worry about this other crushing reality that's going on across the world.